Skylar had lived next door to Asher for 23 years and they'd never spoken more than a handful of words to each other. 23 years of seeing him every single day, walking to his car in the morning, working in his yard on weekends, sitting on his porch at night. 23 years of living so close she could hear his music through the walls, could smell what he was cooking for dinner, could track his routines as intimately as her own. 23 years of proximity without connection, not because either of them wanted it that way. Skylar had tried. God, she'd tried. She'd baked cookies and brought them over, only to have his mother answer the door and say Asher was out. She'd invited him to pack gatherings, only to have him receive conflicting invitations at the exact same time. She'd suggested coffee, suggested runs, suggested anything that might lead to an actual conversation. And every single time, something got in the way. But it wasn't coincidence. It wasn't bad timing. It was deliberate, systematic, coordinated manipulation by every single member of the pack leadership. Because the entire pack from Alpha down to the lowest Omega had worked methodically to ensure Skylar and Asher never had a real conversation, never spent time alone together, never had the chance to discover what everyone else already knew. They were mates, fated, destined, chosen by the moon goddess herself. The kind of perfect match that happened maybe once in a generation. The kind of bond that created power beyond normal wolf capabilities. And if they ever figured it out, if they ever completed the bond, if they ever joined their considerable individual abilities into one unified force, they would become the most powerful mated pair in 5 territories. Powerful enough to challenge any alpha. Powerful enough to override pack hierarchy through sheer force of destined connection. Powerful enough to command loyalty from wolves who owed allegiance to other leaders. Powerful enough to unite or destroy everything the pack leadership had spent decades carefully building, which was exactly why the pack kept them apart. Why every interaction was monitored. Why every conversation was interrupted. Why 23 years had passed with 2 destined mates living next door to each other but existing in completely separate worlds. Skylar didn't know this, of course. She just knew that every time she tried to talk to Asher, her literal next-door neighbor, the boy she'd grown up seeing every single day through adjacent windows, something got in the way. Someone would interrupt. An emergency would arise that turned out to be not urgent at all. She'd be called away for pack business that could have waited hours or days. Or Asher would suddenly be sent on a mission that kept him away for weeks, always departing within hours of any planned interaction. At first, when she was younger, she'd thought it was coincidence. Bad timing. The universe having a cruel sense of humor about her apparent inability to connect with the one person she saw most frequently. But after 23 years of coincidences, after literally hundreds of attempted conversations that never quite happened, Skylar was starting to suspect something else was going on. Something deliberate. Something coordinated. Something that involved far more people than just bad luck could account for. The patterns were too precise, too consistent, too obviously designed. Like the time she'd planned a surprise birthday party for her best friend and invited Asher because, well, he lived next door and it felt rude not to. Within an hour, Beta Marcus had shown up at her door with an urgent assignment that would take her away for the entire weekend. The party had been rescheduled. Asher had never been notified. The whole thing had evaporated like it had never been planned at all. Or the time she'd run into Asher at the coffee shop in town, truly by accident. Both of them reaching for the same drink at the pickup counter. They'd laughed. Started talking. For 5 glorious minutes, they'd actually had a conversation about music and favorite books and the weather. And then Alpha Garrett himself had appeared, physically inserting himself between them, claiming he needed to speak with Skylar. Immediately about pack security concerns that turned out to be a routine review that could have happened any time. And this was the one that had really made Skylar suspicious, the grocery store incident. She'd been shopping late at night specifically to avoid the usual pack members. Had run into Asher in the frozen food section. They'd started talking, actually laughing together, and Skylar had felt something click inside her chest. Something that felt like recognition, like coming home, like finding something she'd been searching for without knowing it was missing. And then Beta Marcus had literally pulled the fire alarm, evacuated the entire building, claimed it was a mandatory drill that couldn't wait even though it was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday and there was absolutely no logical reason to test emergency systems at that hour in a civilian grocery store. "You're being paranoid," her best friend Nadia said when Skylar brought it up for the 100th time. They were sitting in Skylar's small backyard, close enough to Asher's property that Skylar could see his kitchen window. Could see him moving around inside, preparing dinner, completely unaware she was watching. "You and Asher have both been busy. That's all. It's not some grand conspiracy." Then explain why every time I invite him to pack events, someone else extends a conflicting invitation. Or why whenever I suggest we grab coffee, suddenly there's a crisis that needs my immediate attention. Skylar ticked off examples on her fingers. "Last month, I ran into him at the grocery store, actually had a conversation going in. Beta Marcus literally pulled a fire alarm to get everyone evacuated. There was no fire, Nadia. He admitted it was a drill. A drill that happened to interrupt the first real conversation I've had with my next-door neighbor in years. Maybe Marcus really did need to run a drill in the middle of the grocery store. At 9 p.m. on a Tuesday." Skylar's voice was rising. "I'm not paranoid. Something is going on. And I'm going to figure out what Skylar didn't know, what she couldn't know, because everyone had worked very hard to ensure she never found out, was that the pack had been actively managing her interactions with Asher since they were both 5 years old. Since the moment the pack's oldest seer had taken one look at them playing in adjacent yards and gone pale with recognition. "Those two," she'd whispered to Alpha Garrett, "are destined mates. Prophesied pair. When they bond, they'll be powerful enough to overthrow you. Powerful enough to challenge the entire pack hierarchy. Powerful enough to unite or destroy everything you've built." Alpha Garrett, like any alpha who valued his position, had made a choice. Keep the potential mates apart. Prevent the bond from forming. Maintain the existing power structure. It was simple, practical, logical, and it had been working for 18 years. But now, Skylar was 23. Old enough to question. Old enough to push back. Old enough to start noticing the patterns that had been carefully constructed around her entire life. And that was dangerous. "We need to do something," Beta Marcus said during the emergency pack leadership meeting called after Skylar's latest attempt to interact with Asher. "She's getting suspicious. Asking questions. If she figures out what we've been doing, she won't figure it out," Alpha Garrett said with more confidence than he felt. "We've been managing this situation for 18 years. We just need to be more careful. More subtle." "Perhaps we should tell her the truth," Elder Sarah suggested quietly. "Explain that we've been protecting her. That the bond would make her too powerful. That it's for her own good." "Absolutely not." Garrett's voice was sharp. "If we tell her, she'll rebel. She'll seek Asher out deliberately. We'll lose all control of the situation." He looked around the table at his leadership team. "We continue as we have been, carefully, subtly, keeping them apart without making it obvious we're keeping them apart." "And if she confronts us directly," Marcus asked, "we deny everything. Make her think she really is being paranoid. Gaslight if we have to. Whatever it takes." Garrett's expression was hard. "The alternative is losing our authority to a mated pair who could command the pack without us. That's not acceptable." What none of them knew was that Asher had figured it out years ago. He'd been 12 years old, barely transitioning into his teenage years, when he'd overheard a conversation between his parents that changed everything. They'd thought he was asleep. Thought he couldn't hear them through the walls. But wolf hearing developed early, and Asher had heard every word. "It's getting harder," his mother had said, her voice tight with stress. She's starting to notice, starting to ask questions. Yesterday, she invited him to that pack bonfire and we had to scramble to send him on a patrol assignment. Eventually, she's going to figure out we're deliberately keeping them apart. We have our orders, his father had replied. Alpha Garrett was clear. The girl next door and our son can never be allowed to interact long enough to trigger the mate bond. The prophecy is too dangerous. Together, they'd be unstoppable. They'd overthrow the entire pack structure. We can't let that happen. But they're just children who will grow into the most powerful mated pair in generations if we're not careful. The seer was absolute in her vision. If Asher and Skylar ever bond, if they ever complete the mate connection, they'll have abilities that supersede alpha authority. They could command wolves across territories, could unite or destroy packs at will, could reshape everything we've built. His father's voice had been firm. So yes, we keep them apart. However, we have to. For as long as we have to, even if it means lying to our own son for the rest of his life. Asher had lain in bed that night, 12 years old, and processing information that shattered his understanding of the world. The girl next door, Skylar, with her bright laugh and kind eyes, was his mate, his destined mate. The one person the moon goddess had chosen specifically for him. And his own parents, his own pack, were deliberately keeping them apart because they feared what he and Skylar would become together. He'd wanted to tell her, wanted to march next door and explain everything, wanted to give her the choice that was being stolen from both of them. But he'd been 12, a child with no power to resist his parents or pack leadership, and he'd understood, even then, what would happen if he tried. They'd separate them completely. Send one of them away. Make it impossible to ever be together. At least living next door. At least being able to see Skylar every day through windows, and during the brief, accidental encounters the pack couldn't prevent. Asher had something. Had the knowledge that she was right there. Close enough to hear, to smell, to sense, even if he couldn't touch. So he'd stayed silent. Spent the next 11 years watching Skylar from a distance. Living next door, but might as well be living in another territory for how often they actually interacted meaningfully. He'd watched her grow up. Watched her date other wolves who weren't her mate. Watched her laugh with friends, excel in pack duties, become this incredible person he knew but didn't know. All while keeping the secret that burned in his chest every single day. It was torture. Exquisite, constant torture. His wolf wind continuously, pressing at the edges of his consciousness, demanding he go to her, demanding he claim what was his, demanding he tell her the truth and let the consequences be damned. But Asher held firm. Because losing even the distant connection they had would be worse than maintaining the torturous status quo. And every year, every month, every day that passed, the pull grew stronger, the mate bond trying to manifest despite everything working against it. The connection that hummed beneath his skin every time Skylar was near. The absolute certainty that she was his and he was hers, and they were meant to be together in a way that transcended pack politics and prophecies and fear. Tonight, Asher stood at his kitchen window and watched Skylar talking with Nadia in her yard. She was animated, gesturing emphatically the way she always did when she was passionate about something, clearly arguing some point with her usual fierce conviction. Even from this distance, even without being able to hear her words or see her expression clearly, Asher felt the pull. The connection that hummed beneath his skin every time she was near. That made his wolf pace restlessly inside him, desperate to close the distance. The mate bond trying to manifest despite everything the pack had done to prevent it over 18 long years. He'd felt it since he was 12. That first conscious awareness of what she meant to him. That certainty that Skylar was his and he was hers, in a way that went beyond choice or preference. That they were meant to be together by forces older and more powerful than pack politics or alpha commands. And every year it got stronger, more insistent, harder to ignore despite his determination to protect what little connection they had. His wolf wind, pressing close to the surface, wanting to go to her, wanting to close the distance between their houses and finally tell her the truth. But Asher held back, like he'd been holding back for 11 years. Because telling her meant losing her completely. Except Asher watched Skylar's expression, the frustration clear even at this distance. Maybe she was figuring it out herself. Maybe the pack's carefully constructed walls were starting to crack. Maybe, after 18 years, the truth was finally going to emerge, whether anyone wanted it to or not. The next morning, Skylar woke with determination. She was done with coincidences, done with interruptions, done with living next door to someone she was apparently forbidden from knowing. Today, she was going to march over to Asher's house and demand a real conversation. And if anyone tried to stop her, she was going to ask them directly why they were so invested in keeping her away from her own neighbor. She got dressed, drank coffee, rehearsed what she'd say. Then she walked out her front door, crossed the small strip of grass that separated their properties, and knocked on Asher's door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened and Asher was there, standing in his doorway, staring at her like she'd performed some impossible feat just by knocking. "Hi," Skylar said. Her rehearsed speech evaporated. Up close, Asher was God. He was gorgeous. Tall, lean muscle, dark hair that fell into eyes that were currently wide with shock. "I'm Skylar. I live next door. I know we've technically met but never actually talked, and I think that's weird, so I'm here to talk." "Can I come in?" Asher didn't answer immediately, just stared at her like he was trying to memorize her face. Finally, he stepped back. "Yes, please, come in." Skylar walked into Asher's house and immediately felt something click. Not into place, into recognition. Like her wolf was waking up after a long sleep. Like her body was remembering something it had known all along but been forced to forget. "Are you?" She stopped. Started again. "Is it just me, or is there something weird happening right now?" "It's not just you." Asher's voice was rough. "Skylar, there's something I need to tell you. Something the pack doesn't want you to know. But I won't keep lying to you anymore. Not when you're standing in my house finally asking questions I've wanted to answer for years. What are you talking about? We're mates." The words came out flat. Simple, undeniable. Fated mates. Destined by the moon goddess. The pack's seer identified us when we were 5 years old. And the pack leadership has spent the last 18 years keeping you as apart because together bonded we'd be powerful enough to challenge their authority. Skylar felt the world tilt. That's insane. That's not, but even as she said it, pieces were clicking together. All the interruptions. All the convenient emergencies. All the times someone had physically come between them when they'd been about to have a conversation. The way her wolf was surging right now, pressing close to the surface, whining with recognition at Asher's proximity. "You're serious?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Completely serious. I've known since I was 12. Overheard my parents talking about it. I've wanted to tell you every single day since then. But I knew if I did, they'd separate us completely. Send one of us away. Make sure we could never even see each other." Asher's hands were clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have told you anyway. I should have given you the choice. But I was selfish. I wanted to at least be able to see you, even if I couldn't be with you." Skylar processed this. 18 years. 18 years of manipulation. 18 years of being kept from her own mate. 18 years of feeling like something was missing without understanding why. They've the pack leadership, they knew. This whole time. Her voice was rising. Alpha Garrett, Beta, Marcazé, all of them, they knew we were mates and deliberately kept us apart. Yes. Because the prophecy says we're too powerful together. that we could overthrow them, that where Asher stopped, unstoppable. That's the word the seer used. Together, bonded, we're unstoppable. Skylar felt rage building. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind that came from years of manipulation finally being exposed. Show me. I want to see proof. I want to know exactly what they did and why. Asher led her to his bedroom, pulled out a box from under his bed that was full of documents, overheard conversations he'd written down, pack schedules showing coordinated efforts to keep them apart, even recordings he'd made of leadership meetings he'd managed to eavesdrop on over the years. I've been documenting everything, he said quietly. Every time they interfered. Every conversation about keeping us separated. Every lie they told. I thought if I ever got the chance to tell you, I wanted to have proof. Wanted you to believe me. Skylar went through the documents with shaking hands. Saw meeting minutes discussing the Skylar Asher problem. Saw schedules coordinating who would interrupt them when. Saw messages between pack leaders about how to handle situations where they got too close. It was all there. Years and years of systematic manipulation. Her entire life choreographed by people who'd decided her destiny was too dangerous to allow. We need to tell everyone, she said finally. The whole pack. They deserve to know their leadership has been lying for 18 years. They deserve to know she stopped as another thought hit her. What happens if we complete the bond? What does unstoppable actually mean? I don't know exactly. The prophecy was vague. Something about combined power that exceeds anything seen in generations. About being able to command loyalty from any wolf. About strength that can't be challenged through normal means. Asher moved closer to her. But Skylar, we don't have to complete the bond if you don't want to. This is your choice. It's always been your choice. The pack took that choice away from you. I won't do the same. Skylar looked at this man, this mate who'd been living next door her entire life. Who'd known the truth for 11 years and kept silent to protect what little connection they had. Who'd documented everything in case he ever got the chance to prove it. Who is now giving her the choice that should have been hers all along. I want to complete the bond, she said. Her voice was steady. Certain. Not because some prophecy says we're powerful together. Because you're mine and I'm yours, and they had no right to keep us apart. I want to complete it, and then I want to confront the pack leadership, and I want to show them exactly what happens when you manipulate people for 18 years. Are you sure? Once we bond, there's no going back. We'll be connected forever. And the pack, they'll see it as a threat. They'll fight back. Let them fight. I'm done being managed. I'm done being controlled. Skylar moved closer. Close enough that she could feel heat radiating from his body. Asher, we've lost 18 years. I don't want to lose one more second because of them. The bond snapped into place the moment they kissed. Not gradually, not gently, but like a dam breaking, like lightning striking, like two pieces of a puzzle finally fitting together after decades of being deliberately kept apart. Power flooded through both of them. Not just the normal mate bond that connected to wolves, but something more. Something vast and ancient and absolutely certain. Skylar felt her wolf merge with Asher's in a way she'd never experienced. Felt strength that wasn't just hers, but theirs. Felt abilities awakening that she'd never known she possessed. When they pulled apart, both their eyes were glowing. Not with the normal amber of wolf eyes, but with silver light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond them. Somewhere old and powerful and undeniable. Oh, Skylar breathed. That's what they were afraid of. That's what we are. Asher's voice was layered with power. Skylar, I can feel every wolf in the pack. Their bonds, their connections, their loyalty to the Alpha. And I think he stopped. I think we could command them. Override the Alpha's authority completely. Not through force, through the mate bond. Through whatever this power is. Skylar felt it too. Every pack member within miles, connected through invisible threads of loyalty and hierarchy. And she and Asher Tager stood outside that hierarchy. Above it, with the ability to pull those threads and make them respond. We need to be careful, she said. This much power, it's what they were afraid of. If we're not careful, we could become exactly what they feared. Tyrants. Dictators. Using power without oversight. So we don't do that. We use it to demand accountability. To force honesty. To make sure no other mates are ever manipulated like we were. Asher took her hand. The physical contact amplified their connection, made the power hum louder. Are you ready? To confront the pack leadership? Absolutely. Skylar's eyes blazed silver. Let's show them what unstoppable actually means. They walked into pack headquarters, hand in hand. The building was busy afternoon, various wolves conducting pack business. The moment Skylar and Asher entered, every wolf stopped and turned. Felt the power radiating from the newly bonded pair. Felt the mate bond that was stronger than anything they'd ever experienced. Alpha Garrett, Asher's voice, carried through the building with command that made everyone freeze. We need to talk. Now. Garrett emerged from his office, Beta Marcus at his side. They took one look at Skylar and Asherat. Their glowing eyes, their joined hands, their obvious bond went pale. You bonded? Garrett's voice was flat. Despite everything we did to prevent it. You bonded. Yes, we did. After finally learning the truth about what you've been doing for 18 years, Skylar's voice was cold. You knew we were mates. You deliberately kept us apart. You manipulated both our lives to prevent the bond from forming. And you did it because you were afraid of losing power. We were protecting the pack, Marcus started. You were protecting yourselves. Asher cut him off. Protecting your positions, your authority, your control. Don't pretend this was about the good of the pack when it was about keeping yourselves in power. Wolves were gathering now, drawn by the confrontation, by the power radiating from Skylar and Asher, by the realization that something fundamental was shifting in the pack hierarchy. We should take this to private chambers, Garrett tried. No, Skylar's voice rang with authority. Everyone deserves to hear this. The entire pack deserves to know what you've been doing. So we're having this conversation publicly. Right here. Right now. She turned to address the assembled wolves. For 18 years, the pack leadership knew Asher and I were destined mates. And for 18 years, they systematically kept us apart. Interrupted every conversation. Coordinated schedules to prevent interaction. Lied to both of us about why we could never seem to connect. They did this because a prophecy said we'd be too powerful together, that we could challenge their authority, that we'd be, she smiled without humor, unstoppable. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Shock, anger, recognition, as wolves started putting together their own pieces of the puzzle they'd witnessed over the years. And they were right, Azure continued. We are powerful together, more than they could have imagined. I can feel every wolf in this pack right now. Feel your connections, your loyalties, your bonds. And we could override the Alpha's authority completely. Take control of the entire pack with a thought. More murmurs. Fear now mixing with the anger. This was what Garrett had been trying to prevent. Mates powerful enough to overthrow the entire hierarchy. But we're not going to do that, Skylar said firmly. Because that would make us exactly what they feared. Instead, we're going to demand accountability. We're going to demand the pack leadership answer for 18 years of manipulation. We're going to demand new leadership that doesn't see powerful mates as a threat to be suppressed. She looked at Garrett directly. And we're going to make sure no other wolves are ever treated the way we were. You can't just decide the pack needs new leadership, Garrett started. Actually, we can. Asher's voice was quiet but carried absolute certainty. That's exactly what the prophecy meant. We're not bound by normal hierarchy. We're not subject to Alpha authority. We stand outside it, above it. And right now, we're choosing to use that position to demand change. This is a coup. This is accountability. Skylar cut him off. You spent 18 years manipulating us to prevent exactly this moment. Well, the moment's here anyway. So now you answer for what you did. Publicly, honestly. Every wolf in this pack deserves to know. Their leadership was willing to deny mates their destined bond just to maintain power. The pack was shifting. Skylar could feel it through the strange new awareness she and Asher shared. Loyalties wavering. Wolves questioning leadership they'd trusted. The careful structure Garrett had built starting to crack under the weight of exposed manipulation. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence, Beta Marcus said suddenly. Every head turned toward him. He looked at Garrett with something like regret. I've gone along with this for 18 years, followed orders, participated in keeping Skylar and Asher apart. But this, he gestured to the bonded pair, this is wrong. They're right. We've been protecting our positions instead of serving the pack. I'm calling for new leadership elections. You can't, Garrett sputtered. I can. Any beta can call for leadership review if they believe the alpha has failed in their duties. And manipulating mates to prevent bonding? That's a failure. A significant one. Marcus looked at the assembled wolves. All in favor of immediate leadership review. Hands went up. Not all of them. There were still wolves loyal to Garrett. Still wolves who feared change more than they valued truth. But more than half. Enough to force the review? Garrett's face went through several expressions. Shock, fury, resignation. Finally, he nodded stiffly. Fine, we'll have elections. But don't think this means it means exactly what it looks like, Elder Sarah said, speaking up for the first time. She'd been silent during the confrontation, but now she moved forward. It means the pack has lost confidence in your leadership. It means your time as Alpha is over. And it means we have a chance to rebuild under new leadership that doesn't see powerful mates as threats. Over the next 3 weeks, the pack restructured completely. Elections were held. New leadership was chosen, younger wolves, who'd never been comfortable with Garrett's manipulative tactics. Marcus was elected Alpha, with Sarah as his Luna. They immediately implemented new policies protecting mate bonds, banning interference in destined pairings, creating oversight committees to prevent future abuse of authority. And Skylar and Asher, they settled into their new reality. Bonded, powerful, deeply in love with someone who'd been right next door their entire lives, but might as well have been in another territory. Do you think they were right to be afraid? Skylar asked one evening. They were in her backyard. The space that separated their houses felt less relevant now that they were together. About how powerful we'd be together. Probably. Asher pulled her closer. We could have taken over. Could have used our combined power to dominate the pack. Could have become exactly what they feared. But we didn't. Because power doesn't corrupt. Fear of losing power corrupts. And we weren't afraid. He pressed a kiss to her hair. We were just finally able to be what we've always been. Mates, took us long enough. 18 years living next door, and we needed the pack's conspiracy to be exposed before we could actually talk. Skylar laughed. What a waste. Not a complete waste. We have now. We have the future. We have forever. Asher's voice was warm. And everyone knows, everyone finally knows that some bonds are too strong to suppress. That trying to keep destined mates apart will always fail, eventually. That fear of power creates more problems than the power itself ever would. 6 months after the bond completion, Skylar and Asher stood in front of the pack during a formal ceremony. Not as challengers. Not as threats. but as symbols of what happened when manipulation failed and truth won. For 18 years, Skylar addressed the assembled wolves. The old leadership kept Asher and me apart. They were afraid of what we'd become together. Afraid we'd overthrow them. Afraid our combined power would destabilize everything they'd built. And they were right to be afraid, Asher continued. Not because we wanted to hurt them, but because we represent something they couldn't control. A bond that supersedes their authority. Power that doesn't require their permission. Truth that exposes their lies. But here's what they didn't understand, Skylar said. Power isn't the threat. Abuse of power is. And we don't intend to abuse ours. Instead, we're using it to protect other mates. To ensure no one else is manipulated the way we were. To create a pack where destined bonds are celebrated instead of feared. We're not asking to lead, Asher added. We're not demanding authority. We're just existing as we always should. Have bonded, powerful, and committed to making sure the pack serves its members instead of the members serving power-hungry leaders. The pack howled approval. New leadership that had been elected stood with them rather than against them. And for the first time in 18 years, Skylar and Asher could just exist as mates, without constant interference. 5 years later, Skylar sat in the backyard between their houses. They'd never merged the properties. Liked keeping their separate spaces and watched Asher play with their 3-year-old daughter. She was already showing signs of the combined power her parents possessed. Already stronger, faster, more intuitive than most wolf pups her age. Think the pack will try to suppress her too? Nadia asked. She'd become a regular visitor. Her earlier skepticism about pack conspiracy completely transformed once the truth came out. Not a chance. Skylar's voice was firm. We've made it very clear what happens to anyone who tries to manipulate our daughter. And more than that, the pack's learned. They've seen what happens when you try to suppress power instead of channeling it properly. They won't make that mistake again. What if she's even more powerful than you, too? Then we'll teach her to use it wisely. To use it for good. To understand that power is a responsibility, not a weapon. Skylar watched her daughter chase butterflies with single-minded determination. She'll be unstoppable. Just like her parents, but unstoppable doesn't mean uncontrollable. It just means honest, powerful, true to herself. The pack was terrified of that word, unstoppable, because they thought it meant violent, dominating, dangerous. Skylar smiled. But it really just means impossible to suppress. Impossible to manipulate. Impossible to keep from your destined path. And yes, that is dangerous. To people who rely on suppression and manipulation to maintain power, but to everyone else, it's just freedom. 10 years after the bond, Skylar and Asher had become leaders without ever seeking the position. Not Alpha and Lunathos roles belonged to Marcus and Sarah, but leaders nonetheless. Wolves came to them for guidance, for wisdom, for help navigating complex situations that normal pack hierarchy couldn't address. They'd also become protectors of other powerful mates. 3 other destined pairs had been identified in various packs over the years, pairs whose combined power might threaten existing leadership. Skylar and Asher had intervened in each case, made it clear that suppressing mate bonds was no longer acceptable, that any pack trying to prevent destined pairings would face consequences. They were unstoppable, but not in the way anyone had feared, not as tyrants or conquerors, as forces of nature, as inevitabilities, as proof that some things, love, destiny, truth couldn't be suppressed no matter how hard anyone tried. 20 years after the bond, Skylar stood at Asher's grave and felt the mate bond pull tight. He'd been killed in an accident for wolves, but not impossible. And Skylar, who should have died from the grief of losing her mate, was still standing. still strong, still here. Because that was what unstoppable really meant. Not that they couldn't be hurt, but that they couldn't be destroyed. Even death couldn't completely sever what they'd built. The bond remained, transformed but not broken. And Skylar carried it forward, honoring Asher's memory by continuing their work. She protected mates, exposed corruption, ensured no wolf was ever manipulated the way she'd been, used her power, their power, to make the world incrementally better. She was unstoppable, just like the prophecy had said, just like the pack had feared, just like she and Asher had proven. And she would continue being unstoppable until the day she joined him. Because that's what mates did. They persevered. They endured. They loved beyond death and time and every attempt to keep them apart. They were next-door neighbors who should have known each other their whole lives but were kept apart for 18 years. They were destined mates who finally found each other despite everything designed to prevent it. They were unstoppable not because they conquered, but because they refused to be suppressed. And that made all the difference. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts. And if you'd like to support me, please subscribe. It's free, and it helps more people hear these stories.